I came home from emergency surgery to find my sister in my bed with her boyfriend, claiming the doctor said I might not make it and they needed somewhere to stay. What happened next changed everything about how I understood family, boundaries, and my own worth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Dr. Alexandra Alex Martinez had always believed that preparation could overcome any obstacle life presented. At 31, she had methodically built a successful veterinary practice in the charming coastal town of Monterey Bay, California, where the Pacific Ocean provided a backdrop for the life she had carefully constructed through years of disciplined effort and strategic planning. Her clinic, Bay Area Animal Care, occupied a renovated Victorian house on a tree-lined street just blocks from the waterfront, serving a loyal client base that had grown through word-of-mouth recommendations and her reputation for compassionate, expert care. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of her home office as Alex reviewed patient charts before heading to the clinic. Her house, a modest but well-maintained craftsman bungalow she had purchased 3 years earlier, reflected her personality through its combination of professional efficiency and warm personal touches. Medical journals sat neatly stacked beside framed photographs of successful animal surgeries, while her grandmother's vintage teacup collection added softness to the otherwise organized workspace. Alex's journey to veterinary medicine had begun during childhood visits to her grandmother's farm in rural Oregon, where she had learned that healing required both scientific knowledge and intuitive understanding of living creatures. Her grandmother, Elena Martinez, had possessed an almost mystical ability to calm frightened animals while administering practical care that often succeeded where conventional approaches had failed. Those early lessons about patience, observation, and gentle persistence had shaped Alex's approach to both veterinary medicine and life itself. The path through veterinary school had demanded sacrifices that her peers often found difficult to understand. While other students attended social events or pursued romantic relationships, Alex maintained laser focus on her studies, working part-time at animal shelters to gain practical experience while earning money for tuition and living expenses. Her academic performance earned scholarships that reduced financial burden, but the emotional cost of constant vigilance about money and grades had created habits of self-reliance that persisted long after graduation. Opening Bay Area Animal Care had required every dollar she could save, borrow, or earn through careful financial planning. The business loan process had been particularly challenging as a young woman without family financial backing, requiring extensive documentation of her qualifications and business projections. She had spent countless evenings developing detailed financial models and marketing strategies that would convince skeptical loan officers to invest in her vision of providing high-quality veterinary care to the Monterey Bay community. The clinic had grown steadily through Alex's commitment to excellence and genuine care for both animals and their human families. She specialized in complex surgical procedures that other local veterinarians often referred to larger facilities, building a reputation for successfully handling cases that required both technical skill and innovative problem-solving. Her surgical success rate was among the highest in the region, earning respect from colleagues and deep gratitude from pet owners who had feared losing beloved companions. Alex's daily routine reflected the discipline that had carried her through veterinary school and business development challenges. She arrived at the clinic by 6:30 each morning, reviewing overnight patient reports and preparing for scheduled surgeries before her staff arrived at 7:30. The precision required for veterinary surgery had trained her to approach every aspect of life with methodical attention to detail, from patient care protocols to personal financial management. The clinic employed 6 full-time staff members who had become like family through their shared commitment to animal welfare and professional excellence. Maria Santos, her lead veterinary technician, had joined the practice shortly after its opening and had proven invaluable in establishing clinical protocols and training newer staff members. Dr. James Liu, her associate veterinarian, handled routine examinations and minor procedures, allowing Alex to focus on the complex surgeries that represented both her greatest professional passion and the clinic's primary competitive advantage. Rebecca Chen served as practice manager, handling client communications, scheduling, billing, and the countless administrative details that enabled the medical staff to focus on patient care. Her background in business administration had transformed their initially chaotic record-keeping into systematic processes that improved both efficiency and client satisfaction. The remaining staff members, including 2 additional veterinary technicians and a receptionist, completed a team that had developed remarkable cohesion and mutual support over the years. The financial success of Bay Area Animal Care had provided Alex with security she had never experienced during her childhood or college years. Monthly revenue consistently exceeded expenses by comfortable margins, allowing her to maintain emergency reserves while investing in advanced surgical equipment that enhanced patient outcomes. The practice's reputation had attracted attention from larger veterinary corporations interested in acquisition, but Alex had declined these offers, valuing independence and community connection over purely financial considerations. Her personal life had developed more slowly than her professional achievements, partly by conscious choice, and partly due to the demanding schedule required to establish and maintain a successful veterinary practice. The emotional investment required for animal surgery and the responsibility she felt toward pet owners created little energy for complex romantic relationships. She had dated occasionally but found that few people understood the emotional toll of veterinary medicine or appreciated the dedication required to maintain clinical excellence. Family relationships had been complicated by geographic distance and philosophical differences about life priorities. Her parents, Ricardo and Carmen Martinez, lived in Phoenix, Arizona, where her father worked in construction management and her mother taught elementary school. They had supported Alex's educational pursuits, but often expressed concern that her focus on career achievement was preventing her from pursuing marriage and children they believed would provide greater long-term fulfillment. Her younger sister, Isabella Martinez Costa, presented more complex challenges that had tested Alex's patience and financial resources over the years. At 26, Isabella had struggled to find career direction after completing a communications degree that had been funded largely through Alex's financial assistance. Isabella possessed natural charisma and creative talents, but lacked the sustained focus and work ethic that Alex considered essential for professional success. Isabella lived in Los Angeles, where she pursued various creative projects including freelance graphic design, social media consulting, and intermittent attempts at influencer marketing that generated inconsistent income. Her lifestyle required financial support that she regularly requested from Alex, usually during moments of crisis when rent payments or other essential expenses exceeded her irregular earnings. Alex had consistently provided this assistance, viewing it as investment in her sister's eventual stability and success. The relationship dynamic between the sisters reflected patterns established during their childhood, when Alex had often taken responsibility for Isabella's emotional well-being and practical needs. Their parents had encouraged this protective relationship, often asking Alex to help Isabella with homework, social difficulties, or other challenges that required patient guidance. The pattern had continued into adulthood, with Isabella turning to Alex for both financial assistance and emotional support during difficult periods. Isabella's current romantic relationship added another layer of complexity to their family dynamics. She had been dating Marcus Torres for approximately 8 months, and their relationship appeared to be progressing toward greater commitment, despite his inconsistent employment history and casual attitude toward financial responsibility. Marcus worked sporadically in construction and entertainment industry jobs, earning enough to contribute partially to their shared expenses, but relying on Isabella's family connections for additional support when needed. Alex had met Marcus during several visits to Los Angeles and found him pleasant, but lacking the ambition and reliability she valued in personal relationships. His charming personality and genuine affection for Isabella were evident, but Alex worried about the long-term sustainability of their relationship, given their combined financial instability and casual approach to career planning. Her concerns remained largely unspoken, as previous attempts to offer guidance had been interpreted as criticism rather than caring support. The morning routine at Bay Area Animal Care proceeded smoothly, as Alex prepared for what promised to be a challenging but rewarding day of surgical procedures. 3 complex operations were scheduled, including a delicate spinal surgery for a German Shepherd whose owners had traveled from San Francisco seeking her specialized expertise. The case would require several hours of intense focus and precision, representing the type of professional challenge that had drawn her to veterinary surgery and continued to provide deep satisfaction. As Alex reviewed surgical protocols and prepared her equipment, she experienced the familiar combination of nervous energy and confident anticipation that preceded complex procedures. The responsibility for animal lives required absolute concentration and technical excellence, but successful outcomes provided emotional rewards that justified every sacrifice required to reach this level of professional competence. The clinic's morning activity buzzed with efficient preparation as staff members completed their opening procedures and prepared for the day's first patients. The teamwork and mutual support that had developed over years of working together created an environment where everyone could perform at their highest level, while maintaining the compassion and attention to detail that distinguished their practice from larger, more impersonal veterinary facilities. Alex's house keys jingled in her pocket as she conducted final equipment checks before the first surgery, their familiar weight providing subtle comfort through routine that had become second nature. The craftsman bungalow that waited for her return each evening represented more than just housing. It symbolized the independence and security she had created through years of focused effort and strategic decision-making. The morning sunlight streaming through the clinic's windows illuminated surgical instruments that gleamed with sterilized precision, ready to perform procedures that would preserve and enhance animal lives, while providing peace of mind to human families who entrusted their beloved companions to her care. Each successful surgery reinforced her sense of purpose and validated the sacrifices required to achieve professional excellence in a field that demanded both technical skill and emotional resilience. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the first patient arrived and Alex began her surgical preparations, she felt the familiar focus and confidence that came from years of training and experience. The challenges ahead were significant but manageable, requiring the same methodical approach and careful attention to detail that had guided every important decision throughout her personal and professional development. The day's surgical schedule would test her skills and endurance, but Alex approached each procedure with the calm determination that had carried her through veterinary school, business development, and every obstacle encountered during her journey, from farm visits with her grandmother to ownership of a respected veterinary practice serving the Monterey Bay community. The foundation she had built through years of disciplined effort felt solid beneath her feet as she prepared to face whatever challenges the day might bring, unaware that by evening, everything she had worked to create would be tested in ways she had never imagined possible. The emergency appendectomy had gone smoothly, but the recovery period Dr. Martinez prescribed was non-negotiable. 3 weeks of limited activity, no lifting over 10 pounds, and absolutely no surgical procedures until her incision healed completely. For someone whose identity had been built around constant motion and professional productivity, the enforced stillness felt more challenging than the actual surgery had been. Alex sat in the passenger seat of her associate drive, Ludo's car, as he drove her home from the hospital, watching the familiar streets of Monterey Bay pass by through a haze of post-anesthetic fatigue. The surgery had been performed by Dr. Margaret Chen, the chief of surgery at Monterey Bay Medical Center, whose reputation for excellence had provided comfort during the frightening hours when acute appendicitis had transformed from mild discomfort to medical emergency requiring immediate intervention. The drive home should have been routine, but Alex found herself experiencing unexpected anxiety about returning to her empty house and facing 3 weeks of recovery without the structure and purpose that veterinary practice provided. The physical pain was manageable with prescribed medication, but the prospect of enforced inactivity created emotional discomfort that surprised her with its intensity. She had never realized how completely her sense of identity and self-worth had become intertwined with professional achievement and constant productivity. Dr. Leo helped her into the house, ensuring she had easy access to medications, water, and the various comfort items the hospital had recommended for optimal recovery. His concern was genuine and practical, reflecting the collegial relationship they had developed over their years of working together at Bay Area Animal Care. Before leaving, he reminded her that the clinic staff could handle all routine procedures, and that her only responsibility was focusing on complete healing. The silence of the house felt oppressive after the constant activity and human interaction that characterized her typical days. Alex settled into her favorite reading chair, surrounded by books, magazines, and her laptop for maintaining minimal connection with clinic operations. The enforced rest should have been welcome after years of demanding schedules, but instead it created space for thoughts and concerns that usually remained buried beneath professional obligations. During the second day of recovery, Alex received a phone call that provided unexpected relief from the isolation and anxiety she had been experiencing. Dr. Catherine Rodriguez, her former professor from veterinary school and continuing mentor, had heard about the surgery through professional networks and was calling to check on her recovery and offer support during what she knew would be a challenging period for someone with Alex's driven personality. Professor Rodriguez had been more than an academic instructor during Alex's veterinary school years. She had served as advisor, mentor, and sometimes surrogate parent figure for students who were navigating the rigorous demands of professional training while managing personal challenges that could derail even the most dedicated individuals. Her office had been a sanctuary where students could discuss not only academic concerns, but also the deeper questions about professional identity, personal values, and long-term career satisfaction that often emerge during the transformative years of professional education. The conversation began with routine inquiries about Alex's physical recovery and practical arrangements for managing clinic responsibilities during her absence. Professor Rodriguez's medical background enabled her to ask informed questions about the surgical procedure, healing timeline, and potential complications that might affect Alex's return to full surgical practice. Her concern was both professional and personal, reflecting the ongoing relationship that had continued long after Alex's graduation and successful establishment of her veterinary practice. As their conversation developed, Professor Rodriguez gently shifted toward topics that revealed her deeper understanding of Alex's personality and the emotional challenges that enforced recovery might create for someone whose self-concept was so thoroughly integrated with professional achievement. She had observed similar struggles among many successful professionals whose identities became so intertwined with work performance that periods of forced inactivity created existential anxiety that could be more distressing than physical discomfort. Professor Rodriguez shared her own experience with a serious injury early in her career that had required extended recovery and temporary departure from veterinary practice. The physical healing had progressed normally, but the emotional adjustment to temporary incapacity had challenged her fundamental assumptions about personal worth, professional identity, and the relationship between achievement and self-respect. The experience had ultimately provided valuable insights about balance, sustainability, and the importance of developing identity beyond professional accomplishments. The discussion evolved into broader examination of the pressures and expectations that often drive high-achieving individuals toward patterns of overwork and self-neglect that can ultimately undermine both health and long-term career satisfaction. Professor Rodriguez observed that many successful professionals, particularly women in demanding fields, develop habits of constant self-sacrifice and relentless productivity that leave little space for personal reflection, relationship development, or simple enjoyment of life beyond work accomplishments. Alex found herself sharing concerns and experiences that she had never articulated to anyone else, including her growing awareness that professional success had not provided the personal fulfillment she had expected when establishing her career goals. The financial security and professional recognition were satisfying, but they had not filled a deeper need for meaningful personal relationships and life experiences that extended beyond veterinary medicine and business management responsibilities. Professor Rodriguez listened without judgment as Alex described the complex dynamics of her family relationships, particularly the ongoing pattern of providing financial and emotional support to her sister Isabella, while receiving little reciprocal consideration or appreciation for her sacrifices. The pattern had developed gradually over many years, beginning with legitimate needs during Isabella's college years, and continuing through various career struggles that seemed to resolve temporarily, only to resurface in new forms requiring additional assistance. The mentor's perspective on family boundary setting proved particularly valuable, as Alex examined her role in perpetuating dynamics that might not be serving anyone's long-term interests. Professor Rodriguez explained that excessive helping could sometimes prevent family members from developing necessary independence and problem-solving capabilities, while creating resentment and imbalance that damaged relationships rather than strengthening them. The conversation revealed patterns that Alex had not previously recognized in her approach to both family and professional relationships. Her tendency to assume responsibility for other people's problems and emotions had created successful outcomes in veterinary medicine, where taking charge of complex situations often produced positive results for animal patients and grateful human families. However, the same approach applied to personal relationships could create dependency rather than mutual support and respect. Professor Rodriguez shared insights about the difference between supportive assistance that empowers recipients and enabling behavior that prevents personal growth and responsibility development. Healthy relationships required balance between giving and receiving, with both parties contributing according to their capabilities and circumstances. When relationships became consistently one-sided, they often generated resentment and dysfunction that ultimately damaged the connection they were intended to preserve. The discussion of professional boundaries extended beyond family relationships to examine Alex's approach to work-life balance and long-term career sustainability. Professor Rodriguez observed that many veterinary professionals experienced burnout and personal dissatisfaction despite external success, because they had not developed adequate separation between professional responsibilities and personal well-being. The emotional demands of veterinary medicine required systematic attention to self-care and relationship maintenance that could not be indefinitely postponed without consequences. As their conversation continued, Alex began to recognize that her current recovery period might provide an opportunity for reflection and rebalancing that could improve both personal satisfaction and long-term professional effectiveness. The forced break from routine responsibilities created space for examining life priorities and considering adjustments that might enhance overall well-being without compromising professional excellence. Professor Rodriguez recommended several books about boundary setting, relationship dynamics, and sustainable approaches to helping professions that could provide frameworks for understanding and potentially modifying patterns that were creating stress rather than satisfaction. She also suggested that the recovery period might be an appropriate time for exploring personal interests and relationships that had been neglected during the intensive years of practice, establishment, and growth. The mentor emphasized that successful people often needed permission to prioritize personal needs and relationships that did not directly contribute to professional advancement. The cultural messaging about achievement and productivity could create guilt about investing time and energy in activities that were simply enjoyable or personally meaningful, rather than professionally productive. However, these investments often provided the emotional and physical renewal necessary for sustained excellence in demanding careers. Their conversation concluded with practical suggestions for managing the recovery period in ways that could promote both physical healing and personal reflection. Professor Rodriguez recommended journaling as a method for processing insights and emotions that might emerge during the quieter pace of recovery. She also suggested reaching out to friends and colleagues for social connection that could provide perspective and support during the temporary departure from normal routines. The phone call had lasted nearly 2 hours. But the time had passed quickly as Alex discovered the relief that came from sharing concerns with someone who understood both the professional challenges and personal complexities of building a successful career while maintaining meaningful relationships and personal well-being. Professor Rodriguez's perspective provided both validation for her achievements and gentle guidance toward areas where growth and adjustment might enhance long-term satisfaction. After ending the call, Alex felt renewed clarity about the opportunity that recovery time could provide for examining life patterns and considering changes that might improve overall well-being. The enforced rest no longer felt like purely negative disruption, but rather like a valuable pause that could inform better decisions about personal and professional priorities moving forward. The books Professor Rodriguez had recommended would provide structured frameworks for understanding relationship dynamics and boundary setting that could improve her interactions with family members, colleagues, and friends. The reading would also provide productive focus during recovery that aligned with her natural inclination toward learning and self-improvement, while addressing areas of life that had received insufficient attention during the intensive years of practice development. As evening approached, Alex prepared a simple dinner and settled into her reading chair with the first book about boundary setting in personal relationships. The physical discomfort from surgery was manageable, and the emotional anxiety about enforced inactivity had been replaced by curious anticipation about insights she might gain during this unexpected period of reflection and learning. The house felt less oppressive as she began reading, transforming from a place of imposed isolation into a sanctuary for personal growth and self-examination that could ultimately enhance both her relationships and professional satisfaction. The surgery that had initially seemed like an unwelcome disruption was beginning to reveal potential benefits that extended far beyond physical healing. The second week of Alex's recovery brought an unexpected revelation about the depth of loyalty and professional commitment that existed within the team at Bay Area Animal Care. What had begun as routine coverage during her medical leave had evolved into something far more meaningful, a demonstration of collective dedication that transformed her understanding of what they had built together over the years. Dr. James Liu arrived at Alex's house on Wednesday morning, carrying a thermos of coffee and a folder containing detailed updates about every case they had handled since her surgery. His visit was officially to discuss complex cases requiring her consultation, but Alex quickly recognized that his primary motivation was ensuring she felt connected to the practice and valued despite her temporary absence from active patient care. The conversation began with clinical discussions about surgical cases that had been referred to specialists in San Francisco, routine procedures that had proceeded smoothly under Dr. Liu's capable management, and administrative decisions that required her input as practice owner. However, the depth of his preparation and the thoroughness of his documentation revealed something more significant than professional courtesy. He had been managing not only his own responsibilities, but also anticipating every aspect of practice operations that might require attention during her extended absence. Dr. Liu explained that the entire staff had voluntarily reorganized their schedules and responsibilities to ensure seamless continuation of patient care and client service standards. Maria Santos had taken on additional training responsibilities for newer staff members while maintaining her existing duties as lead veterinary technician. Rebecca Chen had implemented new communication protocols to keep clients informed about case progress and scheduling adjustments necessitated by Alex's temporary unavailability for complex surgeries. The two additional veterinary technicians, Jennifer Walsh and David Kim, had expanded their roles to include tasks typically handled by Alex herself, such as detailed client consultations about treatment options and post-operative care instructions. Even Sarah Thompson, their receptionist, had developed new systems for managing client concerns and coordinating with specialists for cases beyond their current capacity without Alex's surgical expertise. What struck Alex most profoundly was not simply that her team had maintained operations during her absence, but that they had improved several processes and implemented innovations that could enhance long-term practice effectiveness. Dr. Liu had established relationships with two additional specialist veterinarians who could provide consultation and backup surgical services, creating redundancy that would benefit the practice even after Alex's return to full capacity. Maria Santos had researched and proposed new equipment purchases that could expand their surgical capabilities, while reducing procedure times and improving patient outcomes. Her technical expertise and understanding of Alex's surgical preferences enabled her to identify tools and technologies that aligned perfectly with their practice philosophy and quality standards. Rebecca Chen had analyzed their client retention and satisfaction data to identify opportunities for service improvements that could strengthen relationships while increasing practice profitability. Her business background provided perspectives that complemented Alex's clinical focus, creating comprehensive approaches to practice management that neither could have developed independently. The conversation with Dr. Liu extended beyond operational updates to encompass deeper discussion about practice culture, professional development, and long-term strategic planning. Alex realized that her prolonged focus on individual achievement and self-reliance had perhaps prevented her from fully appreciating the collaborative potential that existed within their established team structure. Dr. Liu shared his perspective on the practice's reputation within the regional veterinary community and the respect that Alex's surgical expertise had earned among colleagues at other facilities. He explained that several veterinarians had expressed interest in referring more complex cases to Bay Area animal care, creating opportunities for practice growth that could benefit everyone while enhancing their service to animal patients requiring specialized care. The discussion revealed that Dr. Luo had been considering his own professional development and potential specialization in emergency medicine, which could complement Alex's surgical focus while expanding their service capabilities. His interest in additional training and certification could strengthen the practice's competitive position while providing him with enhanced career satisfaction and advancement opportunities. As their conversation continued, Alex began to understand that her recovery period had created space not only for her own reflection and growth, but also for her team members to demonstrate initiative and leadership capabilities that had been developing over years of working together. Her temporary absence had revealed strength and competence that had always existed but perhaps had not been fully recognized or utilized due to her tendency to maintain direct control over most practice decisions. The realization was both humbling and encouraging. While Alex had built the practice through individual effort and maintained quality through personal involvement in every significant decision, the team had evolved into professionals capable of independent judgment and collaborative problem-solving that could sustain and enhance what she had created. Dr. Lu's visit concluded with discussion about Alex's return to active practice and the timeline for resuming complex surgical procedures. The medical restrictions would prevent her from performing surgery for another week, but she could begin seeing clients for consultations and participating in case planning that did not require physical procedures. The gradual return to full capacity would allow her to reconnect with patients and clients while observing the improvements and innovations her team had implemented during her absence. The following day brought a visit from Maria Santos and Rebecca Chen, who arrived together carrying lunch from Alex's favorite restaurant and detailed proposals for practice enhancements they had developed collaboratively. Their initiative in identifying improvement opportunities and developing implementation strategies demonstrated the kind of proactive thinking and mutual cooperation that Alex had hoped to cultivate but had not previously observed at this level. Maria presented research about advanced surgical equipment that could reduce procedure times while improving patient outcomes and recovery experiences. Her analysis included cost-benefit calculations, financing options, and implementation timelines that reflected sophisticated business thinking beyond her technical expertise. The proposals demonstrated deep understanding of both clinical requirements and financial considerations that affected practice sustainability and growth potential. Rebecca's contributions focused on client communication systems, appointment scheduling optimization, and service expansion opportunities that could increase revenue while enhancing client satisfaction. Her background in business administration provided analytical frameworks that complemented Maria's clinical insights, creating comprehensive approaches to practice development that integrated operational efficiency with quality patient care. The collaboration between Maria and Rebecca represented something Alex had not previously observed: spontaneous teamwork that produced results superior to individual efforts. Their different backgrounds and skill sets had combined to generate ideas and solutions that neither could have developed independently, demonstrating the potential for enhanced practice effectiveness through systematic collaboration. Their presentation included specific recommendations for professional development opportunities that could benefit individual team members while strengthening overall practice capabilities. Maria was interested in advanced surgical assistance training that could enable her to support more complex procedures while reducing Alex's workload during intensive cases. Rebecca wanted to pursue certification in veterinary practice management that could formalize her business skills while providing frameworks for continued practice growth and optimization. The team members had also discussed cross-training opportunities that could create operational redundancy while providing career development for everyone involved. Jennifer Walsh was interested in expanding her responsibilities to include client education and postoperative care coordination, while David Kim wanted to develop expertise in emergency patient stabilization and critical care support. What impressed Alex most about these discussions was not simply the specific proposals, but the underlying demonstration of commitment to collective success and mutual professional development. Her team members were thinking beyond their immediate job responsibilities to consider how individual growth could contribute to enhanced practice effectiveness and long-term sustainability. The conversation evolved into strategic planning for practice expansion and service diversification that could create additional career opportunities while meeting growing demand for specialized veterinary services in the Monterey Bay region. The team had identified several potential areas for development, including emergency services, orthopedic surgery specialization, and comprehensive wellness programs that could differentiate them from competing practices while providing enhanced value to their client base. Sarah Thompson joined them later in the afternoon, bringing additional insights about client feedback and service requests that had emerged during Alex's recovery period. Her position as the primary client contact had provided her with valuable intelligence about unmet needs and service gaps that could represent opportunities for practice expansion while improving client satisfaction and loyalty. Sarah explained that several clients had inquired about extended hours for emergency services, specialized nutrition counseling, and behavioral training programs that were not currently available through their practice or other local facilities. These requests suggested market demand for services that could be provided through partnerships with specialists or additional staff training that would enhance revenue while serving their existing client base more comprehensively. The collective input from all team members created a comprehensive picture of opportunities and possibilities that Alex had not previously considered. Her focus on surgical excellence and individual achievement had perhaps limited her perspective on collaborative approaches to practice development that could benefit everyone while enhancing their service to the community they served. As the afternoon concluded, Alex felt renewed appreciation for the team she had assembled and the culture they had developed together over years of working toward shared goals. The loyalty and competence they had demonstrated during her recovery period validated her hiring decisions while revealing potential for growth and development that could enhance both individual satisfaction and collective achievement. The recovery period that had initially seemed like unwelcome disruption was revealing opportunities for reflection, relationship development, and strategic planning that could strengthen both personal fulfillment and professional effectiveness. The forced pause from routine activities had created space for recognizing and appreciating assets that had always existed but had not been fully acknowledged or utilized. The team meetings scheduled for the following week would provide opportunity to formalize some of the ideas and proposals that had emerged during these individual conversations. Alex looked forward to collaborative planning sessions that could harness the initiative and creativity her team had demonstrated, while establishing frameworks for continued professional development and practice enhancement that aligned with everyone's career goals and personal interests. The phone call came at 7:30 in the morning, just as Alex was preparing her first cup of coffee since beginning her recovery process. Isabella's voice carried the familiar undertone of crisis that had preceded countless previous requests for assistance over the years. However, this particular call arrived at a moment when Alex's recent conversations with Professor Rodriguez about boundary setting and enabling behavior had created new awareness about relationship dynamics that she had previously accepted without examination. Isabella explained that she and Marcus were facing immediate eviction from their Los Angeles apartment due to accumulated unpaid rent that had reached 3 months in arrears. The landlord had filed formal eviction proceedings and demanded full payment within 72 hours or legal removal of their belongings and termination of their lease agreement. The total amount required was $4,800, representing back rent plus late fees and legal costs that had compounded during the months of deferred payments. The crisis had developed gradually over several months, as both Isabella and Marcus experienced reduced income from their irregular work arrangements. Isabella's freelance graphic design projects had decreased due to economic conditions affecting small business marketing budgets, while Marcus's construction work had been limited by seasonal weather and reduced commercial development activity in the Los Angeles area. Rather than immediately seeking assistance or adjusting their living expenses to match reduced income, they had initially attempted to resolve the situation through partial payments and negotiations with their landlord. These efforts had provided temporary extensions but had not addressed the underlying financial imbalance between their expenses and earning capacity that created ongoing shortfalls, requiring constant attention and creative solutions. Isabella's explanation of their predicament included details about attempts to increase income through additional work opportunities and expense reduction strategies that had proven insufficient to close the gap between their financial obligations and available resources. The narrative was comprehensive and designed to demonstrate that they had exhausted other alternatives before requesting family assistance, but Alex recognized patterns that had characterized previous financial crises requiring her intervention. The emotional tone of Isabella's presentation combined desperation about their immediate housing situation with subtle implications about family loyalty and obligation that had historically proven effective in securing Alex's financial assistance. The underlying message suggested that refusing to help would demonstrate lack of caring and failure to support family members during legitimate difficulties beyond their control. Alex found herself experiencing competing emotional responses as she listened to Isabella's detailed explanation of their circumstances and specific request for financial assistance. Her natural inclination toward helping family members created immediate concern about their housing security and desire to provide resources that could resolve their crisis quickly and effectively. However, her recent conversations with Professor Rodriguez about enabling behavior and boundary setting introduced different perspectives on the situation that complicated her automatic response patterns. The mentor's insights about the difference between supportive assistance that empowers recipients and enabling behavior that prevents personal growth created questions about whether financial rescue would address underlying issues or perpetuate patterns that might require ongoing intervention. Alex asked detailed questions about Isabella and Marcus's budget, expense management strategies, and plans for preventing similar crises in the future. The responses revealed that neither had developed systematic approaches to financial planning or expense control that could provide stability during periods of reduced income. Their lifestyle had been structured around optimistic assumptions about earning potential rather than conservative budgeting based on demonstrated income patterns. The conversation also revealed that Isabella and Marcus had not explored available community resources, social services, or alternative housing arrangements that might provide temporary solutions while they addressed underlying financial management issues. Their focus had been primarily on maintaining their current living situation through external assistance, rather than considering adjustments that could align their expenses with realistic income expectations. Professor Rodriguez's guidance about healthy helping relationships had emphasized the importance of ensuring that assistance supported recipient empowerment and skill development rather than creating dependency that prevented necessary learning and growth. From this perspective, simply providing the requested funds might temporarily resolve the immediate crisis while reinforcing patterns that would likely create similar situations requiring future intervention. Alex explained to Isabella that she was recovering from surgery and would need time to consider the request carefully before making any decisions. This response was met with increased urgency about the legal timeline and potential consequences of delayed action, but Alex maintained her position that significant financial decisions required thorough consideration rather than immediate emotional reactions. The phone call concluded with Alex promising to contact Isabella within 24 hours with her decision about providing assistance. This timeline would allow for reflection and possibly consultation with Professor Rodriguez about applying boundary-setting principles to specific family situations without creating excessive delay that could exacerbate Isabella's housing crisis. After ending the call, Alex experienced the complex emotions that accompany challenging family situations, where competing values and loyalties create internal conflict about appropriate responses. Her desire to help Isabella avoid homelessness was genuine and compelling, but her growing understanding of relationship dynamics raised questions about whether financial rescue would serve anyone's long-term interests effectively. The afternoon brought a follow-up call from Isabella that included additional information designed to strengthen her case for receiving assistance. She explained that Marcus had secured a construction project that would begin the following week and provide steady income for several months, suggesting that their current crisis was temporary rather than indicative of ongoing financial management problems requiring systematic attention. Isabella also mentioned that their parents had been contacted about the situation but were unable to provide assistance due to their own financial limitations and recent unexpected expenses related to home repairs and medical bills. This information was presented to demonstrate that family resources had been exhausted and that Alex represented their final option for avoiding eviction and potential homelessness. The additional details were accompanied by increased emotional intensity as Isabella described her fears about losing their belongings, damaging her credit rating, and potentially having to move back to Phoenix with their parents if they could not resolve the housing situation quickly. The prospect of returning to their childhood home was presented as particularly distressing given her age and relationship status with Marcus. Alex recognized that these follow-up communications represented escalating pressure tactics that had been effective in previous situations where her financial assistance had been requested and ultimately provided. The combination of urgency, limited alternatives, family loyalty, and emotional distress had historically overcome any hesitation about providing requested support. However, her recent education about boundary setting and enabling behavior provided different frameworks for analyzing the situation and considering response options that might better serve everyone's long-term interests. Professor Rodriguez's emphasis on empowerment rather than dependency suggested that alternative approaches might be more appropriate than simply providing the requested funds. That evening, Alex contacted Professor Rodriguez to discuss the application of boundary-setting principles to specific family situations where immediate assistance was being requested. The mentor's guidance proved invaluable in developing a framework for evaluating the request while considering both short-term crisis management and long-term relationship health. Professor Rodriguez explained that healthy assistance in family relationships often involved providing support for problem-solving rather than solutions that prevented recipients from developing necessary skills and capabilities. This approach might include helping with research about community resources, budget development, or employment opportunities, rather than direct financial intervention that addressed symptoms without addressing underlying causes. The mentor also emphasized the importance of distinguishing between emergency situations requiring immediate intervention and crises that had developed gradually through decisions and behaviors that recipients could have controlled with different choices. Emergency assistance for genuine unexpected difficulties was different from recurring financial rescues that enabled poor planning and decision-making patterns. Based on these principles, Alex developed a response strategy that addressed Isabella's immediate housing concerns while promoting long-term financial responsibility and problem-solving skill development. Rather than providing the full requested amount unconditionally, she offered to match funds that Isabella and Marcus could raise independently through expense reduction, additional work, or other resources they could mobilize through their own efforts. This approach would provide substantial assistance while requiring recipients to contribute meaningfully to resolving their crisis through personal effort and resourcefulness. The matching structure created incentives for exploring alternatives and developing capabilities that could prevent similar situations in the future, while still providing significant support during their current difficulties. Alex also offered to research community resources, social services, and financial counseling programs that could provide ongoing support for budget management and financial planning that addressed underlying issues rather than just immediate symptoms. Her professional network included contacts with social workers and financial advisors who specialized in helping individuals develop sustainable approaches to money management and career planning. When she contacted Isabella the following morning to present this alternative assistance approach, the response revealed important information about underlying attitudes and expectations that had characterized their historical family dynamic. Isabella's reaction to the matching funds proposal and resource development assistance was notably less enthusiastic than her response to previous offers of direct financial solutions. The conversation that followed provided Alex with clarity about whether her family relationships were based on mutual respect and reciprocal caring, or primarily on her utility as a resource for solving problems that others preferred not to address through personal effort and lifestyle adjustments. Isabella's response to supportive assistance that required personal contribution and skill development revealed priorities and values that helped Alex understand the true nature of their relationship dynamic. This first application of boundary-setting principles in family relationships represented a significant test of Alex's commitment to healthier interaction patterns that could benefit everyone involved while preserving relationships based on genuine caring rather than financial convenience. The outcome would influence her approach to future family requests and establish precedents for more balanced relationships that supported growth rather than dependency. Isabella's response to Alex's matching funds proposal revealed dynamics that extended far beyond the immediate housing crisis. Rather than expressing gratitude for the substantial assistance being offered, Isabella's reaction demonstrated frustration that the financial support came with conditions requiring personal effort and responsibility. The conversation quickly escalated into accusations that Alex was being selfish and controlling by refusing to provide unconditional assistance to family members facing genuine hardship. The intensity of Isabella's emotional response to what remained a generous offer of help provided Alex with disturbing insights about expectations and entitlement that had apparently developed over years of unconditional financial assistance. Isabella's arguments focused not on appreciation for the support being offered, but on criticism of the requirements for personal contribution that would make the assistance conditional rather than automatic. Marcus joined the conversation during Isabella's second phone call about the eviction situation, adding his perspective about Alex's responsibility to support family members without imposing conditions that created additional stress during already difficult circumstances. His tone carried undertones of presumption about Alex's obligations that suggested extensive discussions between Isabella and Marcus about her financial resources and willingness to provide assistance when requested. The conversation revealed that Isabella and Marcus had apparently developed detailed expectations about Alex's role in resolving their financial difficulties based on previous patterns of assistance that had been provided without conditions or requirements for reciprocal effort. Their assumption that support would be automatically forthcoming reflected a relationship dynamic that Alex had not previously recognized as problematic but now understood as fundamentally imbalanced. Alex attempted to explain the rationale behind offering matching assistance rather than direct financial rescue, emphasizing that the approach was designed to preserve dignity while providing substantial support that could help them develop problem-solving capabilities for handling future challenges independently. However, these explanations were dismissed as psychological manipulation designed to avoid fulfilling family obligations during legitimate crisis situations. The rejection of her alternative assistance approach forced Alex to examine whether her family relationships were based on mutual caring and respect, or primarily on her utility as a financial resource for solving problems that others preferred not to address through personal effort and lifestyle adjustments. The distinction had important implications for understanding the true nature of their connection and appropriate boundaries for future interactions. During the days following these difficult conversations, Alex began reviewing her financial records to understand the full scope of assistance she had provided to Isabella over the years, since graduating from veterinary school and establishing her practice. The analysis revealed patterns that she had not previously examined systematically, but which painted a troubling picture of one-sided financial support that had grown substantially over time. The documentation showed that Alex had provided direct financial assistance totaling over $37,000 during the 5 years since establishing Bay Area Animal Care. This amount included college loan payments when Isabella struggled with post-graduation employment, security deposits and moving expenses for multiple apartment relocations, car repair and replacement costs, medical expenses not covered by insurance, and numerous smaller amounts for various emergencies and unexpected expenses. The pattern of requests had accelerated over time, with assistance amounts increasing and frequency growing, as Isabella's lifestyle expectations expanded beyond her earning capacity. What had begun as occasional help with legitimate emergencies had evolved into routine financial supplements that enabled living expenses exceeding her demonstrated income from freelance work and part-time employment. Most disturbing was the realization that none of this assistance had been acknowledged as loans requiring repayment or even as gifts deserving ongoing gratitude and appreciation. Instead, the support had apparently been internalized as expected family assistance that created obligations for Alex while generating entitlement attitudes in Isabella and Marcus about continued financial availability for future needs. The financial analysis also revealed that Alex's generosity toward Isabella had required sacrifices in her own lifestyle and financial goals that she had not previously calculated comprehensively. The amounts provided for family assistance could have funded significant improvements to her home, enhanced retirement savings, or expanded vacation travel that she had deferred in favor of supporting Isabella's various needs and crises. These discoveries prompted Alex to examine other aspects of their family relationship for evidence of similar patterns where her contributions and sacrifices had been minimized, while expectations for continued support had grown over time. The review produced additional insights about communication patterns, emotional support, and reciprocal consideration that painted a comprehensive picture of relationship dynamics that were fundamentally imbalanced. Isabella's contact with Alex during her recovery period had been limited to the crisis situation requiring financial assistance, with minimal inquiry about her health, surgical experience, or emotional well-being during the challenging period of forced inactivity. The contrast with the attention and support provided by her professional colleagues and mentor highlighted the difference between relationships based on mutual caring and those focused primarily on resource extraction. The discovery process extended beyond financial records to include examination of communication patterns over the past several years. Alex reviewed text message histories, email correspondence, and phone call records to understand the frequency and focus of contact from Isabella and other family members during various periods of her life and career development. The analysis revealed that communication from Isabella increased substantially during periods when she was experiencing financial difficulties or relationship problems requiring emotional support and practical assistance. Conversely, contact decreased significantly when Isabella's life was proceeding smoothly and she did not require external resources or intervention to address immediate challenges or crises. This pattern suggested that Alex's value within the family relationship was primarily instrumental rather than intrinsic, with her importance fluctuating based on her utility for solving problems that others either could not or preferred not to address through personal effort and resourcefulness. The realization was emotionally painful, but provided important clarity about the foundation of relationships she had assumed were based on genuine affection and mutual support. Alex also discovered that Isabella had been sharing details about her financial assistance with their parents and potentially other family members in ways that created expectations for continued support while minimizing recognition of the sacrifices these contributions required. Family conversations apparently included assumptions about Alex's wealth and obligation to provide assistance that reflected neither accurate understanding of her financial situation nor appreciation for the work and discipline required to achieve her professional success. The pattern of expectation and entitlement extended beyond immediate family to include Marcus, who had developed assumptions about Alex's resources and willingness to provide support for their relationship and lifestyle maintenance. His comfortable presumption about her obligation to assist with their housing crisis suggested that Isabella had presented him with a narrative about family financial support that emphasized his right to assistance rather than Alex's generosity in providing it. These discoveries forced Alex to confront uncomfortable truths about how her desire to be helpful and supportive had potentially enabled patterns of dependency and entitlement that served no one's long-term interests effectively. Her financial assistance had not empowered Isabella to develop greater independence and problem-solving capabilities, but had instead created expectations for continued support that prevented necessary personal growth and responsibility development. The realization that her generosity had been systematically minimized and taken for granted created complex emotions combining disappointment, anger, and sadness about relationships she had valued highly, but which appeared to be founded on fundamentally different assumptions about mutual obligation and respect. The discovery process was painful but necessary for understanding the true dynamics that had developed over years of well-intentioned but ultimately counterproductive assistance. Professor Rodriguez's frameworks for understanding healthy relationships provided crucial guidance for processing these discoveries and considering appropriate responses that could either restore balance to family relationships or establish boundaries that protected Alex from continued exploitation of her resources and good intentions. The mentor's emphasis on mutual respect and reciprocal consideration offered standards for evaluating relationship patterns and making decisions about future interactions. The discovery phase also revealed the extent to which Alex's professional success and financial stability had been taken for granted by family members who had not witnessed the sacrifices, discipline, and sustained effort required to achieve her current position. Their assumptions about her wealth and availability of resources reflected lack of understanding about the challenges and costs involved in building and maintaining a successful veterinary practice while managing personal financial responsibilities. This lack of appreciation for her achievements and sacrifices suggested that family members had developed narratives about her success that minimized her personal contributions while maximizing their claims on the benefits she had created through years of focused effort and careful planning. The discovery was particularly painful because it indicated that her accomplishments had been reframed as family resources rather than personal achievements deserving recognition and respect. The documentation of assistance patterns and communication analysis provided Alex with objective evidence for evaluating family relationships and making informed decisions about appropriate boundaries and future interactions. The data supported conclusions that might have seemed harsh or unfair if based solely on emotional impressions, but which reflected clear patterns of behavior sustained over multiple years and various circumstances. Armed with this comprehensive understanding of relationship dynamics that had developed over time, Alex was prepared to make decisions about family interactions that prioritized long-term health and sustainability over short-term emotional comfort or conflict avoidance. The discovery process had been emotionally difficult but had provided essential clarity for establishing boundaries that could preserve relationships while preventing continued exploitation of her resources and good intentions. The third week of Alex's recovery had progressed remarkably well from a medical standpoint. Her incision site showed excellent healing, her energy levels were returning to normal ranges, and Dr. Chen had cleared her to resume light activities including short drives and limited physical movement around her home. The psychological benefits of Professor Rodriguez's guidance and the supportive interactions with her veterinary team had created a foundation of confidence and clarity that made the prospect of returning to full professional activity genuinely exciting rather than merely anticipated. Alex had scheduled her return to Bay Area animal care for the following Monday, planning to begin with client consultations and case reviews before gradually resuming surgical procedures later in the week. The systematic approach to professional reintegration reflected the methodical planning that characterized her approach to most significant life decisions, ensuring that both her physical capabilities and emotional readiness were adequately prepared for the demands of veterinary practice. The decision regarding Isabella's financial crisis had been finalized after extensive reflection and consultation with Professor Rodriguez about appropriate boundary implementation in family relationships. Alex had determined that providing conditional assistance through matching funds represented a balanced approach that offered substantial support while promoting personal responsibility and problem-solving skill development that could benefit Isabella's long-term independence and financial stability. Friday afternoon brought the opportunity to make a brief visit to her house to retrieve additional clothing and personal items that would be needed for her return to normal routines. The trip also provided a chance to assess the condition of her home after 3 weeks of absence, and to prepare the environment for resuming regular activities, including meal preparation, household maintenance, and the various personal routines that had been disrupted by the surgical recovery period. Alex had been staying with her friend and colleague, Dr. Sarah Patterson, who lived approximately 15 minutes from her own neighborhood in a comfortable guest room that had provided the quiet environment and supportive companionship that facilitated optimal recovery. Dr. Patterson's generosity and understanding had created ideal conditions for healing, while maintaining connection to the professional community and social relationships that provided emotional stability during the challenging period of forced inactivity. The drive to her house felt significant as the first independent transportation she had undertaken since the emergency surgery 3 weeks earlier. The familiar streets of her Monterey Bay neighborhood appeared unchanged despite her extended absence, providing reassuring continuity that contrasted with the internal transformation she had experienced through conversations with Professor Rodriguez and reflections about family relationships and professional priorities. Alex parked in her driveway and approached the front door with keys that felt strangely unfamiliar after weeks of disuse, though the house itself appeared exactly as she had left it on the morning when abdominal pain had necessitated the emergency hospital visit that had disrupted all of her carefully planned routines and expectations. The landscaping showed evidence of care from the neighborhood teenager she employed for weekly maintenance, and the mail collection service had prevented any visible accumulation of correspondence or packages. The front door opened smoothly, revealing an interior that initially appeared normal and undisturbed. Alex stepped inside and began moving through the familiar rooms, conducting a casual inspection to ensure that everything remained secure and properly maintained during her absence. The living room, kitchen, and home office all appeared exactly as she had left them, providing comfort about the security of her personal environment and belongings. However, as Alex moved toward the bedroom to collect additional clothing items, she began noticing subtle signs that someone had been present in her house during her recovery period. A coffee mug sat in the kitchen sink that she did not recall using before leaving for the hospital. A throw pillow on the living room couch was positioned differently than she typically arranged it. The thermostat setting was 2 degrees higher than her usual preference for an unoccupied house. These observations created initial concern about possible unauthorized entry, though the signs were so subtle that Alex questioned whether they might represent memory confusion related to the stress and medication effects surrounding her surgical experience. The possibility that she was misremembering details about her home's condition when she departed for the hospital seemed plausible given the circumstances of her emergency medical situation. As Alex approached her bedroom door, she heard sounds that definitively confirmed the presence of other people in her house. Voices, movement, and other noises indicated that someone was currently occupying her most private living space without her knowledge or permission. The realization created immediate anxiety about personal safety and property security, combined with anger about violation of her home and privacy during her recovery period. Alex quietly approached the bedroom door, which was partially closed, and listened carefully to determine the nature of the activity occurring within her personal space. The voices were familiar, belonging to Isabella and Marcus, and their conversation indicated comfortable familiarity with the environment that suggested extended rather than temporary presence in her home. The shock of discovering family members in her house without permission was immediately compounded by overhearing conversation that revealed the extent of their presumption and disrespect for her property and privacy. Isabella was discussing their living arrangements as though they had legitimate claim to occupy her home, referring to the space as perfect for their needs, and expressing satisfaction with the comfort and convenience it provided compared to their previous housing situation. Marcus's contributions to the conversation demonstrated equal comfort with their unauthorized occupation, including specific comments about preferring her house to their Los Angeles apartment, and suggestions about potentially extending their stay beyond whatever timeline they had initially planned. His tone carried no indication of guilt, gratitude, or recognition that they were occupying someone else's home without permission during a period when the owner was recovering from surgery and unable to protect her interests. The conversation also revealed that Isabella and Marcus had been living in Alex's house for at least several days, possibly longer, based on references to routines they had established and plans they were making for continued activities that assumed ongoing access to the property. Their discussion included casual mentions of using her utilities, consuming food from her kitchen, and generally treating the house as their own temporary residence. Most disturbing was overhearing Isabella's explanation to Marcus about why their presence was justified, which included a distorted version of Alex's medical situation that suggested she had been near death and unlikely to survive the surgical complications. Isabella claimed that Alex's doctor had told the family she might not make it, creating a narrative that justified their occupation of her house as reasonable preparation for potential inheritance or family property management. This fabricated medical emergency provided Isabella with an explanation for their presence that reframed unauthorized occupation as responsible family support during a crisis, rather than opportunistic exploitation of Alex's vulnerability during recovery. The narrative also suggested that Isabella had been monitoring Alex's medical situation not out of genuine concern, but to identify opportunities for personal benefit that might arise from serious complications or negative outcomes. Alex realized that Isabella's limited contact during her recovery period had not reflected callous indifference to her well-being, but rather calculated assessment of whether her medical situation created opportunities that could be exploited without detection or consequences. The eviction crisis that had prompted requests for financial assistance had apparently been resolved through unauthorized occupation of Alex's property, rather than through the legitimate assistance she had offered, or independent problem-solving efforts. The betrayal encompassed multiple layers of violation that extended beyond simple unauthorized entry to include manipulation of family relationships, exploitation of medical vulnerability, and complete disregard for personal boundaries and property rights. Isabella and Marcus had transformed Alex's recovery period into an opportunity for personal benefit, while maintaining the fiction that their actions were motivated by concern for her well-being rather than self-interest. Alex quietly retreated from the bedroom area and moved to her home office, where she could process the situation and determine appropriate responses without alerting Isabella and Marcus to her presence in the house. The need for strategic thinking rather than immediate emotional reaction was clear, given the complexity of the violations and the potential for escalation if confrontation occurred without adequate preparation and support. The discovery confirmed every insight that Professor Rodriguez had shared about family boundary violations, and the progression from minor exploitation to major betrayals, when inappropriate behavior was not addressed through clear consequences and relationship adjustments. The pattern that had begun with financial manipulation had evolved into complete violation of personal space and property rights during a period of maximum vulnerability. The situation also validated Alex's recent decisions about conditional rather than unconditional family assistance, as Isabella's response to reasonable boundaries had been to circumvent them entirely through unauthorized actions that eliminated any pretense of respect for Alex's autonomy and decision-making authority. The escalation demonstrated that boundary violations would continue and intensify until decisive action established clear consequences for unacceptable behavior. From her home office, Alex could hear continuing conversation between Isabella and Marcus that revealed additional details about their occupation and future plans that further emphasized their complete disregard for her rights and interests. Their discussion included references to extending their stay indefinitely and potentially establishing permanent residence if Alex's medical condition provided opportunities for longer-term property access. The magnitude of the betrayal required immediate action to protect both her personal interests and her physical safety, as the situation had escalated beyond family relationship issues to include criminal trespass and potential identity theft or financial fraud depending on what access they had obtained to her personal documents and financial information during their unauthorized occupation of her home. Alex recognized that this moment represented a critical decision point that would determine whether she continued enabling destructive family patterns or established definitive boundaries that protected her interests, while potentially preserving relationships with family members willing to respect reasonable limits on their behavior and expectations. Seated quietly in her home office while unauthorized occupants continued their casual conversation in her bedroom, Dr. Alexandra Martinez experienced a profound moment of clarity that transcended the immediate crisis before her. The betrayal she had just discovered represented not merely a violation of property rights or family trust, but rather the inevitable culmination of relationship patterns that had been developing over years of well-intentioned but ultimately destructive enabling behavior. The strategic response to this situation would determine whether she continued perpetuating these patterns or established definitive boundaries that could potentially preserve authentic family relationships while protecting her personal interests and professional stability. The first priority involved ensuring her personal safety and securing evidence of the unauthorized occupation before taking any action that might alert Isabella and Marcus to her presence in the house. Alex activated the voice recording application on her smartphone and carefully documented the ongoing conversation from her bedroom, capturing specific statements about their extended stay, their plans for continued occupation, and most importantly, Isabella's fabricated narrative about Alex's medical condition that purportedly justified their actions. The recorded evidence would prove crucial for any legal proceedings that might become necessary, but it also provided psychological validation for the severity of the boundary violations that had occurred during her recovery period. The casual tone of their conversation, combined with explicit plans for extended or permanent residence, demonstrated that their actions reflected calculated exploitation rather than temporary emergency shelter during a legitimate crisis requiring family assistance. Alex also photographed evidence of their extended occupation throughout her house, including personal belongings in various rooms, food items they had purchased and stored in her kitchen, and modifications they had made to her living environment to accommodate their extended stay. The documentation process required careful movement throughout the house to avoid detection, but it provided comprehensive evidence of property violations that would support any legal or personal actions she might choose to pursue. The strategic analysis of her situation drew heavily upon the frameworks that Professor Rodriguez had provided for understanding boundary violations and implementing appropriate consequences for unacceptable behavior in personal relationships. The mentor's guidance emphasized that effective responses to serious boundary violations required systematic planning rather than emotional reactions, with clear objectives that could be measured and evaluated rather than vague expressions of disappointment or anger that often failed to produce meaningful behavioral changes. The immediate objectives included regaining control of her property, ensuring that Isabella and Marcus understood the serious nature of their violations, and establishing clear consequences that would prevent similar incidents while potentially preserving family relationships with individuals willing to respect reasonable boundaries. The longer-term objectives involved restructuring family relationship dynamics to prevent future exploitation while maintaining connections with family members who demonstrated genuine respect and reciprocal caring. From her home office, Alex contacted attorney Michael Stevens, a family law and property rights specialist who had been recommended by colleagues for his expertise in addressing complex boundary violations that involved both legal and personal relationship considerations. Attorney Stevens agreed to provide immediate telephone consultation about the situation and potential response options that could protect her interests while minimizing unnecessary conflict or legal complications. The legal consultation revealed that Isabella and Marcus had potentially committed criminal trespass, breaking and entering, and fraud through their unauthorized occupation of her property, combined with the fabricated medical narrative they had used to justify their actions. However, the attorney explained that pursuing criminal charges against family members often created additional complications that might not serve her long-term interests effectively, particularly if her primary objectives involved relationship repair rather than punishment. Attorney Stevens recommended a systematic approach that began with formal documentation of the violations, followed by clear communication about required actions and consequences, and culminating in legal enforcement only if voluntary compliance was not achieved within reasonable timeframes. This escalating response structure provided opportunities for relationship preservation, while ensuring that her rights and interests were adequately protected regardless of Isabella and Marcus's willingness to cooperate with reasonable requirements. The attorney also explained the importance of changing locks immediately after regaining control of her property, implementing security measures that would prevent future unauthorized access, and documenting any financial or property damages that had resulted from their extended occupation. These practical steps would protect against future violations while providing evidence for any legal proceedings that might become necessary if voluntary compliance was not achieved. Alex next contacted Professor Rodriguez to discuss the psychological and relationship aspects of implementing decisive boundaries with family members who had demonstrated such extensive disregard for her rights and interests. The mentor's guidance proved invaluable for maintaining perspective about the situation while developing responses that aligned with her values and long-term objectives rather than immediate emotional reactions to the betrayal she had discovered. Professor Rodriguez emphasized that this situation represented a crucial test of Alex's commitment to healthy relationship patterns and personal boundary enforcement. The severity of the violations required proportionate responses that clearly communicated unacceptable behavior while providing opportunities for relationship repair. If Isabella and Marcus demonstrated genuine recognition of their actions and commitment to respectful interaction patterns going forward. The mentor explained that effective boundary enforcement often required accepting that some relationships might not survive the transition from exploitative patterns to mutually respectful interactions. Family members who were primarily invested in resource extraction rather than genuine caring might choose to terminate relationships, rather than accept limitations on their access to financial or other benefits they had come to consider entitlements, rather than generous assistance provided at personal cost. This possibility was emotionally challenging but represented an authentic test of relationship foundations that could ultimately benefit everyone involved. Relationships built on exploitation inevitably created resentment and dysfunction that damaged all participants, while boundaries that supported mutual respect and reciprocal caring could strengthen connections that were based on genuine affection rather than instrumental utility. Alex developed a comprehensive action plan that addressed both immediate property recovery and longer-term relationship restructuring objectives. The first phase involved confronting Isabella and Marcus directly about their unauthorized occupation, presenting them with documented evidence of their violations, and requiring immediate departure from her property. This confrontation would be conducted with attorney consultation available and documented through recording to ensure accurate records of their responses and any commitments they might make about future behavior. The second phase involved implementing security measures to prevent future unauthorized access, including lock changes, security system upgrades, and clear communication with neighbors about approved visitors and suspicious activity reporting. These measures would provide practical protection while demonstrating serious commitment to enforcing the boundaries that had been established through the confrontation process. The third phase involved restructuring family communication patterns to prevent future boundary violations, while maintaining opportunities for authentic relationship development with family members willing to participate in mutually respectful interactions. This restructuring would include clear expectations about financial assistance, property access, and communication protocols that supported healthy relationships rather than exploitative patterns. Alex also contacted Dr. Sarah Patterson to inform her about the situation and request continued accommodation until her house was secure and the immediate crisis had been resolved. Dr. Patterson's support provided both practical assistance and emotional validation during the challenging period when Alex would be implementing decisive boundaries that could potentially result in significant family conflict and relationship disruption. The conversation with Dr. Patterson revealed the strong professional relationships and authentic friendships that Alex had developed through her veterinary career, contrasting sharply with the exploitative family patterns she was addressing. Her colleagues' immediate offer of continued support and practical assistance demonstrated the reciprocal caring and mutual respect that characterized healthy relationships, providing perspective about the standards that should guide all significant personal connections. Before approaching the bedroom to confront Isabella and Marcus, Alex completed final preparations that included positioning her smartphone for recording, reviewing her key points for the confrontation, and ensuring that she had attorney contact information readily available if legal assistance became necessary during the interaction. The systematic preparation reflected her commitment to strategic rather than emotional responses to the crisis, maximizing the likelihood of achieving her objectives while minimizing unnecessary conflict or complications. The confrontation would represent a defining moment in Alex's personal development and family relationship patterns. Her response to this ultimate boundary violation would determine whether years of enabling behavior continued, or whether she established definitive limits that protected her interests, while potentially preserving relationships with family members willing to participate in respectful interactions. The decision to proceed with direct confrontation reflected her commitment to personal growth and healthy relationship patterns, regardless of the immediate emotional costs or family disruption that might result. As Alex prepared to approach her bedroom and confront the unauthorized occupants, she drew strength from the professional success she had achieved through disciplined effort and strategic thinking, the supportive relationships she had developed with colleagues who demonstrated genuine respect and reciprocal caring, and the wisdom she had gained through conversations with Professor Rodriguez about healthy boundary enforcement and relationship dynamics. These resources provided the foundation for confident action despite the challenging nature of the situation she was addressing. The strategic response to this betrayal would require courage, clarity, and commitment to principles that supported long-term well-being rather than short-term emotional comfort. However, the systematic preparation and professional guidance she had received provided confidence that her actions would align with her values while protecting her interests and potentially preserving authentic family relationships that could survive the transition from exploitation to mutual respect. The confrontation that followed Alex's strategic preparation unfolded with the inevitable tension that accompanies decisive moments when fundamental relationship patterns must be addressed through direct action rather than continued accommodation. Standing in her own bedroom doorway while confronting unauthorized occupants represented a surreal reversal of normal expectations about personal security and family boundaries that required sustained focus on established objectives rather than emotional reactions to the immediate circumstances. Isabella and Marcus displayed initial shock upon discovering Alex's presence in the house, followed quickly by defensive justifications that attempted to reframe their unauthorized occupation as legitimate emergency response to her critical medical condition. Isabella immediately began explaining that their presence was motivated by family concern and responsibility, claiming that hospital personnel had indicated serious complications that required family members to prepare for potentially negative outcomes, including property management and personal affairs coordination. The fabricated medical narrative that Alex had overheard earlier became the cornerstone of their defense strategy, with increasingly elaborate details about supposed conversations with medical personnel and family discussions about appropriate responses to her alleged critical condition. Isabella insisted that their occupation of her house represented responsible family action rather than unauthorized trespass, emphasizing that they had been prepared to care for her property and belongings during what they understood to be a life-threatening medical crisis. Marcus supported Isabella's explanation while adding details about their own housing emergency that had coincided with Alex's surgery, creating what he characterized as natural solutions that addressed multiple family crises simultaneously through temporary arrangements that harmed no one, while providing necessary assistance during difficult circumstances for everyone involved. His presentation emphasized practical considerations and mutual benefit, rather than acknowledging any violation of property rights or personal boundaries. The systematic documentation that Alex had prepared proved invaluable during this confrontation, as she was able to present recorded evidence of their earlier conversation that directly contradicted the emergency response narrative they were attempting to establish. The recordings clearly demonstrated their comfort with extended occupation and plans for continued residence that extended far beyond any legitimate emergency assistance timeframe, undermining their claims about temporary arrangements motivated by concern for her well-being. Alex presented the evidence methodically while explaining that their actions constituted criminal trespass and fraud, supported by legal consultation she had obtained regarding appropriate responses to unauthorized property occupation. The formal legal framework provided structure for addressing the violations that prevented the conversation from deteriorating into emotional arguments about family loyalty and obligation that had historically been effective in securing her acquiescence to inappropriate requests and behaviors. Isabella's response to the legal framework revealed the extent to which their actions had been calculated rather than impulsive, as she immediately began negotiating for additional time to arrange alternative housing, while emphasizing the financial and emotional hardships that immediate departure would create for both herself and Marcus. The negotiation approach demonstrated recognition that their position was legally untenable, while attempting to secure continued benefits through emotional manipulation and family obligation arguments. The transition from defensive justification to negotiation for extended accommodation confirmed that Isabella understood the serious nature of her violations while remaining focused on minimizing consequences rather than accepting responsibility for her actions. Her requests for additional time were accompanied by promises of future respect for Alex's boundaries and property rights, though these commitments lacked specificity or accountability measures that would ensure compliance with reasonable expectations going forward. Attorney Stevens had prepared Alex for this predictable response pattern by explaining that individuals who engage in systematic boundary violations often attempt to minimize consequences through partial compliance, combined with promises of future behavioral improvements that lack concrete implementation mechanisms or oversight structures. The attorney had emphasized the importance of requiring immediate full compliance, rather than accepting gradual adjustment processes that often resulted in continued violations and ongoing relationship manipulation. Alex implemented the attorney's guidance by requiring immediate departure from her property within 2 hours, with no exceptions or accommodations for their convenience or alternative housing arrangements. This deadline provided sufficient time for collecting their belongings while preventing extended negotiations that could undermine the clear consequences required for effective boundary enforcement. The firm timeline also demonstrated serious commitment to protecting her rights regardless of any emotional appeals or family pressure that might be applied. Marcus attempted to intervene in the discussion by appealing to family relationships and emphasizing their housing difficulties that would be exacerbated by immediate departure requirements. His approach focused on practical hardships rather than accepting responsibility for the unauthorized occupation, suggesting that Alex should accommodate their housing needs through continued temporary residence, rather than enforcing property rights that would create inconvenience for family members facing legitimate difficulties. The attempt to shift focus from their violations to Alex's responsibility for solving their housing problems represented a classic manipulation tactic that Professor Rodriguez had specifically discussed during their conversations about boundary enforcement in family relationships. The mentor had explained that effective boundary implementation required maintaining focus on the specific violations being addressed, rather than accepting responsibility for solving problems that others had created through their own decisions and behaviors. Alex declined to provide extended accommodation or housing alternatives, explaining that their housing situation was their responsibility to resolve through legitimate means rather than unauthorized occupation of other people's property. This response maintained appropriate boundaries while avoiding acceptance of obligations that would enable continued manipulation and boundary violations in different forms that could develop over time. The conversation revealed fundamental differences in understanding about personal responsibility, property rights, and family relationships that extended beyond the immediate housing situation to encompass broader patterns of expectation and entitlement that had developed over years of unconditional assistance and accommodation. Isabella's incredulous response to enforcement of basic property rights indicated that she had internalized access to Alex's resources as family entitlement rather than generous assistance that could be withdrawn if abused or taken for granted. As the 2-hour departure deadline approached, Isabella and Marcus began collecting their belongings while maintaining arguments about the unfairness and harshness of Alex's response to what they continued to characterize as temporary emergency arrangements motivated by legitimate family concern. Their departure preparations were accompanied by complaints about Alex's selfishness and lack of appreciation for their concern during her medical crisis, demonstrating continued commitment to manipulation tactics even while complying with property evacuation requirements. The departure process provided opportunities for Isabella to attempt additional emotional manipulation through references to potential family relationship damage that could result from Alex's insistence on legal property rights rather than family accommodation and understanding. These appeals emphasized potential isolation from parents and extended family members who might disapprove of legal action against family members facing housing difficulties during challenging economic circumstances. Alex maintained focus on the specific violations being addressed, rather than engaging with broader family relationship implications that Isabella was attempting to introduce into the situation. Professor Rodriguez had specifically warned about this tactic of expanding crisis discussions to include threats about broader relationship consequences that often succeeded in securing compliance with inappropriate requests through fear of family disapproval or social isolation. The implementation of firm boundaries despite emotional appeals and family pressure represented significant personal growth for Alex, who had historically prioritized family harmony and approval over personal rights and interests. The decision to enforce property rights regardless of family reaction demonstrated commitment to healthy relationship patterns that could potentially benefit everyone involved through establishment of clear expectations and mutual respect requirements. During the final stages of their departure, Marcus made explicit threats about potential retaliation through family relationship manipulation and social media campaigns that could damage Alex's professional reputation through false narratives about her treatment of family members during their housing crisis. These threats confirmed the calculated nature of their actions, while revealing the extent to which they were willing to escalate conflict rather than accepting appropriate consequences for their violations. Attorney Stevens had prepared Alex for potential retaliation threats by explaining legal remedies available for addressing harassment, defamation, and continued attempts to violate established boundaries through indirect methods. The attorney emphasized that documentation of threats would support restraining orders or other legal protections if harassment continued after the immediate property violation had been resolved through enforced departure. The departure concluded with Isabella's final attempts to negotiate future family relationship terms that would minimize ongoing consequences for their actions, while preserving access to financial assistance and other benefits that had historically been available through Alex's generosity and family obligation. These negotiations were declined in favor of establishing clear boundaries about acceptable behavior and communication patterns that would be required for any future family interaction. After Isabella and Marcus completed their departure, Alex immediately implemented security measures including lock changes, security system activation, and neighbor notification about unauthorized visitor reporting that would prevent future property violations while providing early warning systems for potential harassment or continued boundary violation attempts. These practical steps provided immediate security while demonstrating serious commitment to enforcing the boundaries that had been established through the confrontation process. The successful enforcement of property rights, despite family pressure and emotional manipulation, represented a fundamental shift in relationship dynamics that would influence all future family interactions. Alex had demonstrated willingness to prioritize personal rights and interests over family approval and harmony, establishing precedents for boundary enforcement that could prevent future exploitation while potentially preserving authentic relationships with family members willing to participate in mutually respectful interactions. The enforcement of clear boundaries with Isabella and Marcus initiated a series of consequences that extended far beyond the immediate property violation to encompass broader family dynamics and social relationships that had been structured around patterns of accommodation and unconditional assistance. The systematic nature of these cascading effects demonstrated the interconnected nature of enabling relationships and the comprehensive impact that decisive boundary implementation could generate across multiple relationship networks simultaneously. The first indication of expanding consequences arrived through a phone call from Alex's mother, Carmen Martinez, approximately 6 hours after Isabella and Marcus had been required to leave the house. Carmen's tone carried a combination of disappointment and accusation that reflected her position as intermediary between family members and her historical role in maintaining family harmony through negotiation and compromise, rather than confrontation and boundary enforcement. Carmen explained that Isabella had contacted their parents immediately after leaving Alex's house, providing a narrative about the confrontation that emphasized Alex's harsh treatment of family members during their housing emergency, rather than acknowledging the unauthorized occupation that had precipitated the boundary enforcement. The narrative presented to their parents focused on Alex's refusal to provide family assistance during difficult circumstances, while minimizing or omitting details about property violations and fabricated medical emergency claims. The conversation with Carmen revealed the extent to which family communication patterns had been structured to protect Isabella from consequences, while positioning Alex as responsible for family harmony and financial support during various crises. Carmen's response to the situation assumed that Alex should have accommodated Isabella's housing needs regardless of the unauthorized nature of their occupation, reflecting expectations about family obligation that prioritized immediate problem resolution over respect for personal boundaries and property rights. Alex attempted to explain the specific violations that had occurred during her recovery period, including the criminal trespass, fabricated medical emergency narrative, and extended unauthorized occupation that had been discovered through direct evidence rather than family speculation or misunderstanding. However, Carmen's response indicated that the details of the violations were less important than the family disruption that had resulted from enforcing consequences, rather than finding accommodating solutions that preserved relationship harmony. The conversation demonstrated fundamental differences in family values and priorities that extended beyond the immediate crisis to encompass broader questions about personal responsibility, mutual respect, and appropriate boundaries in adult family relationships. Carmen's perspective emphasized collective family support and shared resources during difficulties, while Alex's position focused on individual accountability and respect for personal autonomy and property rights that should govern adult relationships, regardless of family connection. Carmen's disappointment was compounded by concern about potential family fractures that could result from legal action or continued boundary enforcement with Isabella and Marcus, particularly if their housing difficulties created long-term hardships that other family members would be expected to address through additional assistance and accommodation. The prospect of assuming responsibility for problems created by Isabella's decisions represented burden shifting that Carmen preferred to avoid through restored family relationships and shared resource allocation. The phone conversation concluded with Carmen's request that Alex reconsider her position and potentially provide some form of assistance that would resolve Isabella's housing situation, while restoring family relationships that had been damaged by the confrontation and boundary enforcement. This request maintained focus on accommodation rather than accountability, suggesting that family harmony required Alex's continued acceptance of inappropriate behavior rather than Isabella's commitment to respectful interaction patterns. The following day brought communication from Alex's father, Ricardo Martinez, whose approach differed from Carmen's emotional appeals through emphasis on practical family considerations and long-term relationship maintenance that he believed should guide decisions about appropriate responses to the current crisis. Ricardo's perspective reflected his construction industry background and problem-solving orientation that prioritized functional solutions over theoretical principles about boundaries and accountability. Ricardo acknowledged that Isabella's actions had been inappropriate, while emphasizing the importance of family unity and mutual support that had historically enabled the family to overcome various challenges through collective effort and shared resources. His position suggested that boundary enforcement, while theoretically justified, should be balanced against practical considerations about family stability and long-term relationship preservation that could be damaged by rigid application of individual rights and property protections. The conversation with Ricardo revealed additional information about family financial dynamics that Alex had not previously understood comprehensively. Ricardo explained that their parents had been providing intermittent financial assistance to Isabella for several years, though their contributions had been smaller and less regular than Alex's substantial and consistent support. The family's collective financial commitment to Isabella's lifestyle maintenance had created shared investment in her success that made boundary enforcement appear potentially counterproductive to other family members who would be affected by relationship disruption. Ricardo also shared concerns about Isabella's relationship with Marcus, expressing reservations about Marcus's influence on Isabella's decision-making and his role in escalating situations that might have been resolved through family negotiation rather than confrontation and legal enforcement. These concerns suggested that family members had been aware of problematic patterns in Isabella's relationship, while feeling unable to address them effectively through direct communication or boundary implementation. The discussion with Ricardo provided insight into family dynamics that had developed over years of accommodating Isabella's various needs and crises through collective support, rather than individual accountability requirements. The pattern had created shared responsibility for her decisions while distributing costs across multiple family members who had different capacities for providing assistance and different tolerance levels for ongoing financial obligations. Ricardo's practical approach included suggestions for compromise solutions that could address Alex's legitimate concerns about property violations while providing some form of assistance that would prevent complete relationship rupture and potential homelessness that could reflect poorly on family values and community reputation. His proposals emphasized restoration rather than continued enforcement, suggesting that lessons had been learned and future violations could be prevented through understanding rather than legal consequences. The cascade effect expanded beyond immediate family members to include extended family and community relationships that had been structured around assumptions about Alex's character and values that were being challenged by her decision to enforce legal boundaries rather than accommodating family needs through continued assistance and property sharing. These broader social implications created additional pressure for compromise and relationship restoration that could preserve established social networks and community standing. Alex received communication from her Aunt Rosa, Carmen's sister, who had historically served as family mediator during various conflicts and crises that had required negotiation and compromise between different family members with competing interests and perspectives. Rosa's intervention reflected family concerns about escalating conflict that could create permanent divisions rather than temporary disagreements that could be resolved through discussion and mutual accommodation. Rosa's perspective emphasized cultural values about family loyalty and collective responsibility that she believed should guide responses to the current situation regardless of legal rights or individual boundary preferences. Her communication included references to their grandmother Elena's example of family dedication and sacrifice that had enabled previous generations to overcome challenges through unity rather than individual protection of personal interests and property rights. The cultural framework that Rosa presented created additional complexity for Alex's decision-making process by introducing broader considerations about family identity and community values that extended beyond individual rights and personal boundary enforcement. The suggestion that boundary implementation conflicted with family cultural values added emotional weight to the practical and relationship consequences that were already challenging Alex's commitment to maintaining established boundaries. Rosa's intervention included specific proposals for mediation sessions that could address underlying issues while restoring family relationships through structured communication and compromise agreements that respected everyone's legitimate needs and concerns. The mediation approach offered potential resolution that could preserve family unity, while establishing clearer expectations for future interactions that might prevent similar conflicts from developing. The expanding family involvement demonstrated the interconnected nature of enabling relationship patterns that had been structured to accommodate Isabella's needs through collective family resources and shared responsibility for problem resolution. Alex's decision to enforce individual boundaries had disrupted established systems that other family members had relied upon to maintain stability and avoid direct confrontation with inappropriate behaviors and expectations. Dr. Patterson provided valuable perspective during this period of expanding family pressure by reminding Alex about the importance of maintaining focus on established principles and professional guidance, rather than allowing family emotions and cultural expectations to override decisions that had been made through careful consideration and expert consultation. Her support reinforced Alex's confidence in her boundary enforcement while providing stability during the challenging period of family relationship adjustment. Professor Rodriguez's continued guidance proved essential for processing the complex family dynamics that had emerged in response to boundary enforcement, helping Alex understand that cascade effects were predictable consequences of changing established patterns, rather than indicators that her decisions had been inappropriate or unnecessarily harsh. The mentor emphasized that sustainable relationship changes often required sustained pressure and potential temporary relationship disruption before healthier patterns could be established. The comprehensive nature of family reaction to Alex's boundary enforcement validated the systematic approach she had taken to addressing the violations, while demonstrating the courage and commitment required to maintain principled positions despite significant social and emotional pressure. The cascade effects represented tests of her commitment to personal growth and healthy relationship patterns that would determine whether the progress she had made during her recovery period could be sustained through challenging implementation phases. The weeks following the comprehensive family pressure campaign revealed unexpected sources of support and validation that provided crucial reinforcement for Alex's boundary enforcement decisions during a period when sustained resistance might have otherwise undermined her commitment to healthy relationship patterns. These supportive interventions emerged from professional networks, community connections, and previously overlooked family relationships that demonstrated the value of principled behavior over extended periods, and the respect that ethical consistency could generate among individuals who shared similar values about personal integrity and mutual respect. The first significant validation arrived through an unexpected phone call from Dr. Elena Rodriguez Kim, a veterinary colleague who had heard about the family situation through professional networks and wanted to provide perspective based on her own experience with similar boundary challenges in family relationships that had created professional and personal complications requiring decisive action to resolve effectively. Dr. Rodriguez Kim practiced veterinary surgery in San Jose and had developed a reputation for both clinical excellence and principled management of complex professional and personal situations that often challenged individuals in demanding careers. Dr. Rodriguez Kim explained that she had faced comparable family boundary violations several years earlier, when her financial success had created expectations for ongoing assistance that had escalated into unauthorized access to her property and professional resources. Her experience had included family members who had used her veterinary clinic for personal meetings, borrowed medical equipment without permission, and expected professional services for their pets without payment, while characterizing these violations as legitimate family privileges rather than boundary violations requiring correction and consequences. The veterinary colleague's perspective proved invaluable because it provided specific examples of how professional success could generate family entitlement attitudes that created ongoing conflicts between personal boundaries and family harmony expectations. Dr. Rodriguez Kim described the systematic approach she had implemented to address these violations, including legal consultation, family communication protocols, and security measures that had eventually restored appropriate boundaries, while preserving relationships with family members willing to respect reasonable limits on their access to professional and personal resources. Her experience had demonstrated that family boundary enforcement often required sustained commitment to established principles, despite emotional appeals and cultural pressure that could undermine confidence in appropriate decisions. The colleague emphasized that boundary violations typically escalated when initial incidents were accommodated, rather than addressed through immediate consequences, creating patterns that required increasingly decisive interventions to resolve effectively without permanent relationship damage or continued exploitation. Dr. Rodriguez-Kim also shared insights about the professional implications of family boundary violations, explaining that colleagues and clients had observed her family's inappropriate behavior and had developed concerns about her professional judgment and practice management capabilities based on her inability to maintain appropriate boundaries in personal relationships. These professional consequences had motivated her to address family violations more decisively than might have been necessary for purely personal considerations, demonstrating the interconnected nature of personal and professional reputation management. The conversation provided Alex with validation that her systematic approach to boundary enforcement aligned with professional best practices for managing complex family situations that could affect career development and community standing. The colleagues' successful resolution of similar violations demonstrated that decisive action could preserve both family relationships and professional integrity when implemented consistently and supported by appropriate legal and professional guidance. The second significant source of support emerged through communication from Maria Santos, her lead veterinary technician, who had observed Alex's family dynamics during various interactions over the years, and had developed concerns about boundary violations that she had not previously felt appropriate to discuss directly. Maria's perspective as a long-term colleague who had witnessed family interactions provided valuable external validation for Alex's concerns about inappropriate expectations and behaviors that might have seemed reasonable from internal family perspectives, but appeared problematic to outside observers. Maria explained that she had noticed patterns during family visits to the clinic, where Isabella had demonstrated entitled attitudes toward staff time and resources, while expressing criticism about Alex's work schedule and professional priorities that seemed to minimize her achievements and contributions. These observations had created concern among staff members about family dynamics that appeared to undervalue Alex's professional success, while maximizing expectations for personal accommodation and financial support. The veterinary technician's insights revealed that professional colleagues had been aware of boundary violations that Alex had not recognized as visible to others, demonstrating that family exploitation could affect professional relationships and workplace dynamics in ways that extended beyond immediate personal consequences. Staff members had developed protective attitudes toward Alex based on their observations of family interactions that seemed designed to diminish her confidence and increase compliance with inappropriate requests. Maria also shared information about conversations she had overheard between Isabella and Marcus during clinic visits where they had discussed Alex's financial resources and property in ways that suggested systematic assessment of assets and opportunities for personal benefit rather than genuine interest in her professional achievements and personal well-being. These overheard discussions had created staff concerns about potential security and privacy violations that could affect clinic operations and client confidentiality if family members continued to have unrestricted access to professional environments. The staff perspective provided Alex with understanding about how family boundary violations had affected her professional environment and colleague relationships in ways she had not previously recognized. The protective response from staff members demonstrated respect and loyalty that contrasted sharply with family expectations for continued accommodation of inappropriate behavior, highlighting the difference between relationships based on mutual respect versus those focused primarily on resource extraction and personal benefit. Rebecca Chen, the practice manager, contributed additional perspective about the business implications of family boundary violations by documenting instances where Isabella's presence at the clinic had created scheduling disruptions, client service delays, and staff distraction that had required operational adjustments to maintain service quality standards. Her systematic approach to documenting these impacts provided objective evidence for the professional consequences of accommodation that extended beyond personal relationship considerations to encompass business operations and client satisfaction metrics. Rebecca's analysis revealed that family boundary violations had generated measurable costs in terms of staff time, operational efficiency, and client service quality that had been absorbed by the practice without recognition or compensation from family members who had benefited from these accommodations. The documentation process had enabled Rebecca to quantify previously overlooked impacts that demonstrated the comprehensive nature of boundary violations that had affected both personal and professional aspects of Alex's life simultaneously. The practice manager's perspective also included observations about client reactions to family interactions that had occurred at the clinic, revealing that some clients had expressed concern about professionalism and boundary management based on witnessed family dynamics that seemed inappropriate for medical environments. These client observations had created potential risks to practice reputation and client retention that could have affected long-term business sustainability if family violations had continued without appropriate boundaries and consequences. Dr. James Lowe provided additional professional support by sharing his observations about Alex's stress levels and performance changes during periods when family crises had required extensive personal attention and resources. His medical perspective enabled him to identify correlations between family boundary violations and physical symptoms, including sleep disruption, appetite changes, and concentration difficulties that had affected both personal well-being and professional performance during extended periods of family accommodation and crisis management. Dr. Lowe's clinical observations provided objective evidence for the health impacts of enabling relationship patterns that had created chronic stress and resource depletion, without corresponding support or appreciation from family members who had benefited from extensive accommodation and assistance. His documentation of these health effects validated the medical necessity of boundary enforcement for protecting both physical well-being and professional sustainability over extended periods. The associate veterinarian also offered practical support by volunteering to assume additional responsibilities during the period when family relationship restructuring might require extended attention and emotional energy from Alex. His willingness to provide professional coverage demonstrated colleague support that contrasted with family expectations for continued accommodation, despite negative consequences for Alex's health and professional obligations. The comprehensive support from professional colleagues provided Alex with validation that her boundary enforcement decisions aligned with external observations about appropriate relationship patterns and professional standards. The contrast between colleagues' support and family resistance highlighted the difference between relationships based on mutual respect and reciprocal caring versus those focused primarily on accommodation and resource extraction, without corresponding consideration for personal costs and consequences. Professor Rodriguez reinforced the significance of professional support by explaining that colleague validation represented independent confirmation of boundary violation patterns that family members might attempt to minimize or reframe as misunderstandings, rather than systematic exploitation requiring decisive correction. The mentor emphasized that external perspectives provided crucial reality testing during periods when family pressure might otherwise undermine confidence in appropriate decisions about boundary enforcement and relationship restructuring. The discovery of comprehensive professional support created renewed confidence in Alex's boundary enforcement approach while providing practical resources for sustaining principled positions, despite continued family pressure and emotional appeals. The alignment between professional colleague observations and her personal concerns about family boundary violations validated the systematic approach she had implemented, while demonstrating that ethical consistency generated respect and support from individuals who shared similar values about mutual respect and appropriate relationship boundaries. This network of professional support provided foundation for continued boundary enforcement while offering practical assistance and emotional validation during the challenging period of family relationship adjustment that would determine whether healthy patterns could be established and maintained over extended periods, despite resistance from family members who preferred previous accommodation patterns that had provided personal benefits without corresponding responsibilities or reciprocal consideration. The strategic breakthrough that fundamentally altered the dynamics of Alex's family boundary enforcement emerged through an unexpected source of validation that provided irrefutable evidence for the appropriateness of her decisions, while simultaneously creating consequences for Isabella and Marcus that extended beyond her individual enforcement efforts. This development transformed the situation from a personal family conflict into a broader pattern of accountability that demonstrated how principled boundary enforcement could generate systematic positive outcomes that benefited multiple parties, while establishing clear precedents for appropriate behavior in professional and personal relationships. The catalyst for this transformation occurred during the third week following the property violation confrontation, when Attorney Stevens contacted Alex with information that had emerged through legal research and professional network communications regarding Isabella and Marcus's broader pattern of boundary violations that extended beyond their unauthorized occupation of Alex's property. The attorney had discovered that their actions represented part of a systematic approach to exploiting family and social relationships for housing, financial support, and resource access that had affected multiple individuals over an extended period of time. Attorney Stevens explained that his investigation had revealed similar incidents involving Marcus's extended family members in Los Angeles, where unauthorized property occupation and fabricated emergency situations had been used to secure temporary housing and financial assistance from relatives who had initially provided accommodation based on presumed family obligations and crisis response requirements. The pattern suggested calculated exploitation rather than isolated poor judgment during legitimate emergencies, providing context that validated Alex's decision to pursue legal documentation and formal consequences rather than family-based resolution approaches. The legal research had also uncovered civil court records indicating that Isabella and Marcus had previously been involved in tenant disputes, contract violations, and financial obligation defaults that demonstrated systematic patterns of irresponsible behavior regarding property rights, financial commitments, and legal obligations. These records provided objective evidence for concerns about character and reliability that supported Alex's boundary enforcement decisions, while undermining family arguments that their violations represented isolated incidents caused by temporary circumstances beyond their control. Most significantly, Attorney Stevens had learned through professional networks that Isabella and Marcus were currently subject to investigation by local authorities regarding potential fraud activities involving fictitious medical emergencies and family crisis narratives that had been used to secure assistance from community organizations, charitable institutions, and government assistance programs. The investigation had been initiated by complaints from multiple sources who had discovered inconsistencies in their emergency claims and documentation that suggested systematic deception rather than legitimate crisis situations requiring community support. This information transformed Alex's individual boundary enforcement from family conflict into participation in broader accountability processes that could prevent continued exploitation of vulnerable individuals and organizations that provided assistance based on trust and presumed legitimate need. The legal framework that Alex had implemented provided documentation and evidence that could support community protection efforts, while validating her decision to pursue formal consequences rather than accommodation that might have enabled continued violations affecting other potential victims. Attorney Stevens recommended coordination with investigating authorities to ensure that Alex's documentation and evidence could contribute to comprehensive accountability processes that addressed the full scope of Isabella and Marcus's boundary violations and fraudulent activities. This coordination would provide additional legal protection for Alex while contributing to community welfare through prevention of continued exploitation of assistance programs and individual resources intended to support legitimate emergency situations and family needs. The attorney also explained that the broader investigation provided legal justification for continued security measures and communication restrictions that Alex had implemented to protect her property and personal well-being from potential retaliation or continued harassment. The documented pattern of systematic violations supported restraining order applications and other legal protections that could ensure her safety, while accountability processes addressed the comprehensive scope of inappropriate behaviors and criminal activities. The revelation of systematic violation patterns provided Professor Rodriguez with additional frameworks for understanding the family dynamics that had developed around Isabella's behavior over extended periods of time. The mentor explained that family members often become inadvertent enablers of systematic exploitation when they focus on individual incident management, rather than recognizing broader patterns that indicate character issues requiring comprehensive intervention rather than accommodation and ongoing assistance. Professor Rodriguez emphasized that Alex's systematic approach to boundary enforcement had been appropriate for addressing character-based violations that extended beyond family relationships to encompass broader community exploitation. The mentor explained that individuals who engage in systematic boundary violations typically escalate their activities when faced with individual resistance, making community-wide accountability essential for preventing continued harm to vulnerable populations and institutions that provide assistance based on trust and presumed legitimate need. The psychological framework that Professor Rodriguez provided helped Alex understand that her family's resistance to boundary enforcement might have reflected their unconscious awareness of broader violation patterns that would be exposed through systematic investigation and accountability processes. Family pressure for accommodation might have represented attempts to prevent discovery of extensive inappropriate activities, rather than genuine concern about relationship preservation and family harmony maintenance. This perspective provided Alex with additional validation for maintaining established boundaries, despite family pressure, while contributing to broader protection efforts that could benefit community resources and individual victims of systematic exploitation. The mentor emphasized that principled individuals often serve crucial roles in exposing and addressing patterns of exploitation that might otherwise continue indefinitely due to social pressure for accommodation and conflict avoidance that enables continued victimization. The community implications of the investigation created opportunities for Alex to contribute to positive social outcomes that extended beyond personal boundary enforcement to encompass protection of vulnerable individuals and institutions that could be targeted by systematic exploitation efforts. Her documentation and evidence provided crucial support for accountability processes while demonstrating how individual boundary enforcement could contribute to broader community welfare and protection efforts. Dr. Patterson provided additional support by connecting Alex with professional networks that included other individuals who had experienced similar exploitation patterns and had successfully implemented boundary enforcement strategies that contributed to broader accountability and protection efforts. These connections provided practical guidance and emotional support while demonstrating that systematic exploitation often affected multiple victims who could benefit from coordinated response efforts rather than isolated individual resistance that might be less effective in addressing comprehensive violation patterns. The professional network connections revealed that Alex's experience represented part of broader social patterns, where successful individuals became targets for systematic exploitation by family members and acquaintances, who developed elaborate narratives and manipulation strategies designed to access resources through emotional appeals and fabricated crisis situations. Understanding these patterns provided context that reduced personal responsibility and guilt, while emphasizing the importance of decisive boundary enforcement for community protection and individual well-being. The veterinary community response to Alex's situation provided additional validation through expressions of support and appreciation for her principled approach to addressing boundary violations that could have affected professional reputation and practice operations if accommodation had continued without appropriate consequences. Colleagues recognized that her systematic boundary enforcement protected not only personal interests, but also professional standards and community trust that supported ethical business practices and service delivery throughout the regional veterinary network. Maria Santos and Rebecca Chen provided crucial practical support during the period when legal coordination and investigation participation required additional time and emotional energy from Alex. Their willingness to assume expanded responsibilities while maintaining service quality standards demonstrated professional loyalty and shared commitment to ethical principles that contrasted sharply with family expectations for continued accommodation, despite negative consequences for personal and professional well-being. The comprehensive support from professional colleagues, legal advisors, and community networks provided Alex with resources and validation that enabled sustained commitment to boundary enforcement despite continued family pressure and emotional appeals. The alignment between individual boundary enforcement and broader community protection efforts transformed personal decisions into contributions to social welfare and accountability that generated respect and appreciation from individuals who shared similar values about ethical behavior and mutual responsibility. The investigation developments also created natural consequences for Isabella and Marcus that extended beyond Alex's individual enforcement efforts to encompass broader accountability for systematic violations that had affected multiple victims and community resources. These consequences provided validation for Alex's boundary enforcement decisions while demonstrating how principled individual action could contribute to comprehensive problem resolution that benefited broader communities and vulnerable populations. The transformation of individual boundary enforcement into community protection efforts provided Alex with renewed confidence and purpose that extended beyond personal relationship management to encompass meaningful contribution to social welfare and ethical community standards. The alignment between personal principles and community values created foundation for sustained commitment to healthy relationship patterns while contributing to broader positive outcomes that validated the importance of individual accountability and systematic consequence implementation for inappropriate behaviors and exploitation attempts. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.